get up and leave. Don't say anything to your parents," the text message read, lighting up my phone screen as I sat across from my mom and dad at Romano's Italian kitchen, celebrating what I thought was just another ordinary Sunday dinner. My fork froze halfway to my mouth, marinara sauce dripping back onto the plate as my hands started trembling. The message was from Jake, my roommate of 3 years, and I'd never heard panic in a text before, but somehow I could feel it radiating through those 8 words. My parents were still talking about my sister's wedding plans, completely oblivious to the way my world had just tilted sideways. I glanced toward the restaurant's front windows, scanning the parking lot for anything unusual, my heart hammering against my ribs as I realized that whatever had spooked Jake enough to send that message was serious enough that staying put might not be safe. The familiar warmth of our family dinner suddenly felt like a trap, and I had maybe 30 seconds to figure out how to get my parents and myself out of there without causing a panic. My name is Zara Blackwood, and I've always been the cautious one in my family. While my younger sister Meredith jumped headfirst into adventures and relationships, I was the one who read reviews before trying new restaurants and kept a spare phone charger in every bag I owned. At 26, I worked as a data analyst for a cybersecurity firm downtown, spending my days identifying patterns in network traffic that most people would find mind-numbingly boring. My apartment in Riverside Commons was a 15-minute walk from the office, shared with Jake Morrison, a freelance graphic designer who paid his half of the rent on time and kept the common areas cleaner than I did. We'd found each other through a Craigslist ad 3 years ago and had settled into the kind of comfortable roommate relationship where we knew each other's schedules, but didn't feel obligated to hang out constantly. Jake worked late, I got up early, and we crossed paths in the kitchen most mornings while I made coffee and he grabbed leftover pizza for breakfast. Sunday dinners at Romano's had been a family tradition since I was in high school. Every week, my parents would pick me up at 6:30 sharp, and we'd drive the 12 minutes to the same corner booth where my mom would order chicken parmigiana and my dad would pretend to consider the menu before getting his usual lasagna. These dinners were predictable in the best way, a weekly anchor point where I could count on my mom asking about work and my dad telling stories about his coworkers at the insurance office. I'd never imagined that this simple routine could become dangerous, or that a single text message could transform everything I thought I knew about my ordinary, careful life. If this kind of story keeps you up at night wondering what comes next, make sure you're subscribed. Some truths are stranger than fiction. The trouble started 6 months earlier when I began noticing irregularities in network access logs at my company, Sentinel Systems. As a data analyst, I spent my days monitoring user behavior patterns, flagging unusual activity that might indicate security breaches or internal threats. Most of the time, anomalies turned out to be employees working odd hours or accessing files from different locations than usual, nothing sinister, just the natural chaos of people trying to do their jobs. But this was different. Someone with administrative privileges was accessing client databases during off hours, downloading information that had nothing to do with their department responsibilities. The access patterns were careful, methodical, never taking enough data at once to trigger automatic alerts. Whoever was doing this understood our security protocols intimately. I brought my concerns to my supervisor, Marcus Webb, a 15-year veteran who'd hired me straight out of college and had always encouraged my analytical instincts. Marcus reviewed my findings, praised my attention to detail, and promised to investigate immediately. He asked me to compile a comprehensive report documenting every suspicious access, which took me 3 weeks of detailed forensic work, cross-referencing timestamps and user credentials. 2 days after I submitted the report, I was called into Human Resources for what they described as a routine performance review. Linda Harrison from HR sat across from me with a folder thick enough to contain months of documentation. She explained that concerns had been raised about my work quality and attention to detail. Several colleagues had reported that I'd been making accusations against other employees without sufficient evidence. The folder contained copies of emails I'd never seen before, messages that appeared to be from my company account, filled with paranoid theories about coworkers and wild claims about corporate espionage. The writing style was close enough to mine to be believable, but the content was unhinged, unprofessional, completely unlike anything I would ever send. Marcus sat beside Linda, nodding sympathetically as she explained that the company would be placing me on administrative leave while they evaluated my mental health and fitness for continued employment. The betrayal was surgical, precise, designed to neutralize me while protecting whoever was actually stealing client data. 3 weeks into my administrative leave, I got a call from Detective Angela Morrison, no relation to my roommate Jake, just one of those coincidences that makes you wonder about the universe's sense of timing. She wanted to meet for coffee to discuss what she described as some questions about my former employer. We met at a small cafe near my apartment, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and locally roasted coffee that costs more than it should. Detective Morrison was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with intelligent eyes and the kind of direct communication style that made me trust her immediately. What she told me changed everything I thought I understood about my situation. Sentinel Systems was under federal investigation for corporate espionage, specifically for selling client security data to competitors and foreign entities. The investigation had been ongoing for 8 months, long before I'd noticed those irregular access patterns. They had evidence, surveillance footage, financial records showing payments to offshore accounts. The person they were investigating was Marcus Webb. My supervisor, my mentor, the man who'd encouraged me to dig deeper into those suspicious network activities, had been systematically stealing and selling client information for over 2 years. When I'd started getting close to discovering his operation, he'd orchestrated my removal from the company using forged emails and manufactured performance issues. Detective Morrison showed me printouts of the fake emails allegedly from my account. The metadata revealed they'd been created using Marcus's administrative credentials, backdated to appear as if I'd been sending increasingly erratic messages to colleagues for months. He'd built a paper trail that painted me as an unstable employee making unfounded accusations, the perfect cover story to discredit any legitimate concerns I might raise about his activities. But here's what made my blood run cold. Detective Morrison explained that Marcus wasn't working alone. The espionage operation involved multiple people within the company and had connections to a larger network of corporate information brokers. They believe some of the conspirators knew about the federal investigation and were taking steps to eliminate potential witnesses. She asked if I'd noticed anyone following me, any unusual phone calls, any sense that someone might be monitoring my activities. When I said no, she handed me a card with her direct number and told me to call immediately if anything felt wrong. That conversation happened on a Thursday. The text from Jake came 3 days later, during what should have been a peaceful Sunday dinner with my parents. After reading Jake's message, I excused myself to use the restroom, my legs unsteady as I walked past other families enjoying their Sunday dinners. In the small bathroom mirror, my face looked pale and unfamiliar, like I was seeing a stranger wearing my clothes. I splashed cold water on my wrists and tried to think clearly about what to do next. Jake wasn't the type to panic over nothing. In 3 years of living together, I'd seen him handle everything from kitchen fires to breakups with the same steady calm. If he was telling me to leave immediately without explanation, something was genuinely wrong. I called Detective Morrison's direct number, but it went straight to voicemail. My hands were shaking as I typed a quick response to Jake. "What's happening? Are you safe?" The reply came back immediately. "Can't explain. Just trust me. Get somewhere public and stay there." Standing in that bathroom, I thought about my parents sitting at our usual table, probably wondering why I was taking so long. They had no idea that their daughter had stumbled into something that apparently involved federal investigations and corporate espionage. They thought I was on temporary leave from work, dealing with some minor workplace stress. The idea of putting them in danger made me feel sick. But I also thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, confident in my work, proud of my analytical skills, certain that doing the right thing would be enough to protect me. That woman had trusted the system, had believed that bringing evidence to her supervisor would result in justice rather than retaliation. Maybe it was time to stop trusting systems and start trusting the people who actually cared about me. Jake had sent that warning for a reason. Detective Morrison had given me her card for a reason. Sometimes survival isn't about understanding everything that's happening, it's about recognizing when people who have no reason to lie to you are telling you to run. I returned to the table and told my parents I wasn't feeling well, stomach issues, probably something I ate for lunch. My mom immediately went into caretaker mode, offering to drive me home and make tea, but I insisted I just needed fresh air and would take a rideshare back to my apartment. The lie came easily, which surprised me more than it should have. Dad paid the check while Mom gathered her purse, both of them fussing over me in that gentle way parents do when they sense something's wrong but don't want to pry. I hugged them goodbye in the parking lot, holding on a few seconds longer than usual, breathing in my mother's familiar perfume and my father's aftershave. They had no idea I was saying goodbye to more than just dinner. I walked 3 blocks from the restaurant before calling a rideshare, constantly checking over my shoulder for anyone who might be following. The driver was a college student who spent the ride talking about midterm exams, completely oblivious to my paranoia. I had him drop me off at a 24-hour diner 6 blocks from my apartment instead of going home directly. The diner was mostly empty except for a few late-shift workers grabbing coffee and a group of teenagers sharing a plate of fries. I chose a booth near the back with a clear view of both the entrance and the emergency exit, then called Jake's number. No answer. I tried twice more before sending another text. I'm safe. Where are you? 20 minutes passed before my phone rang. Jake's voice was barely above a whisper when he answered. He told me he'd been home around 4 that afternoon when he noticed a van parked across the street with 2 men inside who'd been sitting there for over an hour. When he went to take out the trash, he overheard them discussing whether I was home and when I usually returned on Sundays. One of them had photos. Jake had slipped out the back of our building and called me from a gas station 3 miles away. He was staying with his brother across town until we could figure out what was happening. The men were still there, he said, still watching our apartment. That's when I realized Marcus Webb and his associates weren't just trying to discredit me, they were actively hunting me. I spent that night in the diner, nursing coffee and pretending to read while actually watching every person who walked through the door. At 3 a.m, Detective Morrison finally called me back. She sounded tired but alert, like she'd been expecting bad news. What she told me confirmed my worst fears. The federal investigation had accelerated based on new evidence, and arrests were planned for the following week. Someone inside the network had apparently learned about the timeline and was making moves to eliminate potential witnesses before law enforcement could act. Marcus Webb had been under surveillance for weeks, and that surveillance had revealed something chilling. He'd compiled detailed profiles on every employee who might have discovered his activities. My name was at the top of that list, along with my home address, daily routines, and information about my family members. Detective Morrison arranged for me to meet her at the federal building downtown at 8 a.m. She would be bringing me into protective custody until the arrests were completed and the immediate threat was neutralized. In the meantime, she was sending patrol units to check on my parents and to monitor my apartment building. But first, there was something she needed me to do. The federal agents were planning to execute search warrants simultaneously at multiple locations, including Marcus's home office and several business locations connected to the espionage network. They needed someone who understood Sentinel Systems' data architecture to help them identify and preserve evidence before it could be destroyed. She was asking me to help them build the case that would put Marcus and his collaborators in prison. After months of being painted as an unstable employee making false accusations, I would have the chance to prove that everything I discovered was not only real, but part of something much larger and more dangerous than I'd imagined. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had tried to discredit my analytical abilities to protect his criminal operation. Now those same abilities would be used to dismantle everything he'd built. At dawn, I walked out of that diner and took a taxi to the federal building, ready to help bring down the man who'd tried to destroy my career and possibly my life. The arrests happened on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later. Marcus Webb, 2 other Sentinel Systems employees, and 5 people from various client companies were taken into custody simultaneously across 3 states. The local news covered it as a major corporate espionage case, but they didn't mention my role in the investigation. I spent those 3 weeks in what amounted to protective custody, a furnished apartment across town, daily check-ins with federal agents, and strict instructions not to contact anyone from my previous life until the operation was complete. The isolation was harder than I'd expected. No job, no routine, no familiar places or people. Just waiting and wondering if the people who'd been watching my apartment had been arrested or were still out there somewhere. The day after the arrests, Detective Morrison called to tell me it was safe to go home. Jake had been staying with his brother but was ready to move back in. My parents had spent 3 weeks thinking I was dealing with a minor health issue, calling every few days to check on my recovery from what I'd told them was a stomach bug that wouldn't go away. Walking back into my apartment felt surreal. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, my coffee mug, still in the sink from that Sunday morning, mail piled up on the kitchen counter, Jake's graphic design projects spread across the dining room table. The normalcy of it felt almost shocking after weeks of looking over my shoulder. That evening, Jake and I sat on our couch eating takeout Chinese food and trying to process what had happened. He apologized for the cryptic text message, explaining that he'd been afraid our phones might be monitored. I thanked him for trusting his instincts and potentially saving my life. We spent the rest of the evening watching terrible movies and pretending things could go back to normal, both of us knowing that some experiences change you in ways that don't fade with time. 6 months later, I'm working for a different cybersecurity firm with better protocols and more transparent management. I still do data analysis, but now I also train other employees on recognizing internal threats and the importance of reporting suspicious activities through proper channels. Marcus Webb pleaded guilty to corporate espionage and received an 8-year federal sentence. His conviction made industry headlines and led to new security requirements for companies handling sensitive client data. Sometimes I see his name in articles about corporate crime, and I'm reminded of how close I came to becoming another casualty of his operation. The strangest part of the whole experience was learning to trust people I barely knew while discovering that someone I'd trusted completely was actively working to harm me. Jake's warning text, Detective Morrison's willingness to believe my story, federal agents who treated me as a credible witness rather than a paranoid employee, all of them saw something worth protecting when my own workplace had written me off as unstable. I still have Sunday dinners with my parents, though we've switched to a different restaurant. They know more of the story now, enough to understand why I sometimes check my surroundings more carefully than I used to. Trust, I've learned, isn't just about who deserves it, it's about recognizing when someone is trying to earn it through their actions rather than their words.